I was unsurprised, Mike, about the Steelers getting a job done. I thought it didn't make any sense that if the Steelers were going to go all in on all the pieces, that they would just suddenly stop at TJ Watt. Is that a good way of looking at it?
Yeah, I agree with you. There could be a line of thinking where you would say the Steelers should trade Minka Fitzpatrick and they should try to acquire picks to help move up in the first round next year to get their quarterback. Or you could make an argument the Steelers could have moved off of TJ Watt and used that draft capital to move up and get a quarterback next year. But I agree with you that if you're going to have a vision and you're going to have a plan, and you just went out and you acquired a 30-year-old Jalen Ramsey, you signed a 34-year-old Darius Slay, you still have Cam Hayward, who's going to be 36 years old this season. You just brought in a 41-year-old quarterback. All these signs feel like the Steelers are trying to win in a very condensed window, for right or wrong. So I agree that TJ Watt needs to be part of that. And beyond that, it would have taken, I mean, some major guts to trade TJ Watt. You would have had to get a ridiculous haul back, and then the scrutiny on those eventual draft picks would have been extreme. And if you swung and missed on the first round, which happens with the pick you got for TJ Watt, you would never live that down. And so, Omar Khan has said, dating back to the combine, he said he's been around guys who've been one helmet type of guys, Troy Polamalu, Jerome Bettis, for example. And so, they have said that they want to get the deal done. Now, by doing it before training camp, they can avoid all that messy distraction and now start going about their business and preparing for the year.
Thanks for joining us so much, Mike. Were you kind of surprised that this deal got done before training camp, and especially before Micah Parsons is presumably going to get his big deal from Dallas?
Well, it was wise that they got it done before Micah Parsons because, you look at the situation, Myles Garrett really held the Browns hostage. He came out and he said, this is a loser organization. They're never going to win anything. And it's so important
Tell
for
me
me
the
to win
lie.
that
Tell me the lie, Mike.
right. That he said, I need to be traded. And then they said, here is a big boatload of money, and he said, I changed my mind. I'm happy to sign. So I wondered what kind of leverage play would TJ Watt have to pull to get his money? You go back to 2021, the last time he was in a similar situation, he did stage a hold in, and it extended throughout training camp. It was a distraction, and it wasn't until the Thursday before the season opener that they finally got a deal done. And based on history, I looked at last season. Cam Hayward was in a very similar situation where he didn't get his money and his new contract until just days before the season opener. Even a younger player like Pat Fryermuth last year, it took until just days before the season opener for him to get his deal. So just based on history, I was anticipating a hold-in. And so I think that Omar Khan, maybe he's evolving his process. And I think that it was the right approach to try to get this deal done because, if they're going to be all in, if they're going to go for it this year, you needed to have TJ Watt under contract sooner than later. So they avoid the distraction. Now they can just, start preparing for the season.
Well, and like I think you said about getting this done before Micah Parsons gets his deal done, like you were better off not getting into camp because then you are up against the clock and you are racing Dallas to getting a deal done because Micah wants to one up this TJ Watt deal, and TJ would have wanted to one up this Micah Parsons deal.
Right.
So it did make sense because if Micah goes into Dallas and goes into camp and he holds out, and then you got a TJ holding out, it really becomes an arms race at that point. Who can get the best deal done? And then all the leverage becomes on the players' backs. So I think it made perfect sense to get this done now.
I saw a great tweet that said, congratulations on Micah Parsons for signing a contract worth $42 million per season. Of course, because Myles Garrett got 40, TJ one-upped him with 41. And that's the way that it works, that often the highest paid player at a position is not the best player, but it's the good player who has most recently renegotiated or extended their contract.
Mike, we've seen many star players that are holding out for new deals, create a lot of drama. Myles Garrett, as you brought up, is one of them by taking out a full-page ad in the Cleveland newspaper. What does it kind of tell you about TJ Watt that throughout this whole process, we didn't really see any drama out of him other than that social media post of him posing a peace sign?
Yeah, I thought that the peace sign on social media, that was definitely a little bit cryptic. It always kind of cracks me up when guys take that approach. But what I did like was he held out of mandatory minicamp, right? And so he kind of made his statement, and I think at least caused the Steelers to have enough doubt about, is this going to be a holdout? Is this going to be a hold in? That maybe he put the pressure on them that way and was able to exert leverage earlier rather than waiting for things to go on. So I think that he took a pretty good approach, and he's about his business. Now he can start working out and getting ready for the year.
We are talking with Mike DeFabo of The Athletic. You can follow him on Twitter at Mike DeFabo. That's DEFABO. Mike, you mentioned the one helmet thing with TJ being a one helmet guy, probably Cam Hayward being a one helmet guy. In a world where one helmet guys is already rare, you've got two on the same defense. That's pretty unique, and that feels very Pittsburgh Steelers-ish, because that if there's a team stuck in tradition and the past, it is the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Right, absolutely. And that's kind of the tough thing for a negotiator. And you asked me if I was surprised by this coming out now. I was, because I had a story that was supposed to come out on Monday talking about Omar Khan as a negotiator. And his very first contract negotiation, was with Jerome Bettis in 2001. And Jerome talked about how it was a difficult negotiation because Omar didn't necessarily realize, as a recent hire, that Jerome means more than just his stats and his production on the football field. This is a member of the community, and he's somebody who has connected with this fan base on a deeper level. And I would put TJ Watt in a similar category here, where you know that he's going to be in the Ring of Honor one day for the Steelers. And now, he's going to have an opportunity to do so, potentially wearing just one helmet. Now, here's the thing. When we're evaluating how great of a Steeler is TJ Watt, we measure this by playoff success. And I think one of the greatest quotes that I've heard in the locker room came from TJ Watt last year. And he talked about how these guys who come back for alumni weekend, they're Super Bowl champions. They have a certain aura about them, and there's a certain different vibe about them, and people treat them differently and look at them differently. And he said, that's not a knock on the guys who haven't done it, because I haven't. He hasn't won a playoff game in Pittsburgh, and that's something he's trying to change. So he is going to end up being, he's the second fastest player to 100 sacks. He's going to be one of the best edge rushers of all time. But when it comes to defining his legacy within the Steelers organization, really, he is driven by that playoff success. And I think that it's fair to evaluate him going forward based on if the Steelers can snap this now 8-year postseason winless drought.
Well, let's talk about that postseason winless drought on the other side of the break as we start looking into camp as it comes to Mike's hometown. Let's dive into that when Extra Points returns. You're watching Extra Points on WTAJ Plus. Back here on Extra Points, Mike DeFabo of The Athletic joining us to talk about the Steelers as they get set to open up camp. Mike, the Steelers report on Wednesday to St. Vincent. You're a Latrobe native, mostly. Do you know the story? It's so funny. We might go on a tangent here. We dove into this. Do you know the story of how the Steelers got to Latrobe?
Man, well, I do know that the Rooney family was connected there. Am I on the right track?
Yeah.
And at some point, I don't know if it was Art Rooney Sr., like the chief, who took his sons to getaway at training camp. Am I on the right track? Fill me in here.
The story I read, and this was off the Steelers website, that Art Rooney Jr., Dan's brother, Dan's brother, or Dan's brother, he went to St. Vincent. And he really just wanted to bring the team to his university. And then they had a fire in like the 60s, and they had to rebuild the university. And so by 66, it was basically a brand new school that was bigger, larger, and up to date. And so they're like, this is the time to do it. And so the rest is history, because now the team has been there. And it's kind of crazy, honestly, because teams don't do this anymore, Mike.
Yeah, I was a little concerned during COVID, when the Steelers, like everybody else, just stayed at their own facility. I was really worried that they were going to decide, look, players love sleeping in their own beds. Our facilities are better. We don't have fans that are taking videos and putting our plays out there. Let's just get let's be done with it. And I was really concerned about that. And luckily, to the Steelers' credit, they did come back to Latrobe. And I'll say, from being from Latrobe, I grew up there. I graduated from high school from Latrobe High School. It means so much to that community in so many different ways. Financially, it's huge for a lot of the businesses. They make like an enormous amount of their yearly income just based off of people coming, visiting the restaurants, things of that nature. But then beyond that, when I went to college and stuff, people would ask, like, where are you from? And I would say, I'm from Latrobe, home of Steeler training camp. That just means so much to the people there. And so, as you see the NFL turn into this money making machine, I think in a lot of instances, they've lost the personal touch. And I think by the Steelers still going to Latrobe and going to training camp at a small college like that in a small town, I think that's really an important thing. And I hope they continue it forever.
Mike, this is about to be the toughest question I ever asked in my life. What's the go-to food place in Latrobe for you?
Well, look, I love both Dinos and Sharkies. I think that they're both good in their own right. But for me, my favorite, I'm a huge chicken wing guy, first of all. And I absolutely love the Dino's wings. And I'll give people a little tip if they're going to training camp. The best way to get them is triple timed, which means they're like extra crispy. And the sweet and hot that's like their signature sauce. I think that's the best. There's also one called Slicker, which I think is like barbecue mixed with something else, hot sauce and maybe parm or something like that. But that's also an excellent choice. But you got to always go with the OG and go with the sweet and hot.
I wrote it down. I'll report back to you after during camp.
And you sound like you know what you're doing. If you're like, I'll take 20 wings, triple time, sweet and hot. So it'll give you a little bit of street cred.
You have to have a favorite story of being a kid and having the Steelers in town. What's your best story?
I actually really do. So I probably am doing this job because I grew up in Latrobe going to Steelers training camp. And it's funny because as the players walk up the stairs, I was standing there and I would just be saying, hey, Cordell Stewart, can I get an autograph? And now it's kind of funny because after the Steelers do their walkthrough, here I am, you know, 30 years later, 25 years later, standing there saying, hey, TJ Watt, do you have a minute? And doing an interview with him. So it really brings me full circle. But my favorite moment was Jerome Bettis is ambling up the stairs. And, guys like Cordell Stewart and Yancey Thigpen, some of these other guys who thought they were stars, they just walked right through and didn't sign any autographs. And Jerome signed every single autograph on one side and then came to the other side and signed every single autograph. And I actually didn't even get an autograph that day, but just seeing the way that Jerome approached fans, how he was approachable, how he understood, like, these are little kids that adore you and like you mean so much to them. And this is going to make their entire year. Just the respect that he had and the way he treated people with dignity. That's something that has stuck with me forever. And one of the many reasons that I have a tremendous amount of respect for Jerome Bettis.
Mike, now that the TJ Watt deal is done, what's kind of the biggest storyline that you're going to be following entering Latrobe?
Well, I think one of the big questions that I have is like, how do all these moving pieces fit into the secondary? When we first got the news of this trade and we heard they're bringing in Jalen Ramsey, I'm thinking, okay, that makes sense. Maybe he's going to be the nickel corner. And then you hear that Minka Fitzpatrick is going over to Miami, and you start wondering, like, well, how are you going to fill that void? And so, I have some thoughts or some projections or guesses of how I think it's going to play out. I think one way you could do it is it could just depend upon what package you're in. If they're in their base defense, maybe Ramsey starts on the outside as an outside corner. Then you go to nickel and Slay comes in and that bumps Jalen Ramsey into the nickel position in the slot. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it, if you want to have your four best defensive backs on the field at all times, is you have Slay play outside corner in the base defense and Ramsey at free safety in the base. So, that's going to be one of the big things that I'm watching is when they go to these different personnel groupings and these different packages, where is Jalen Ramsey lining up? And then I think that's going to evolve. And I think that's going to be something the Steelers are really going to have to figure out if they're going to unlock his full potential and the full potential of this defense.
I'll tell you what, Mike, though, 3-3-5 is all the rage in college these days. And if you want to get creative and you want to try something a little out of the box, you don't see it in the NFL that much. but a 3-3-5 base defense would kind of fit the personnel, at least at the moment.
Yeah, I think at least the five defensive backs makes tons of sense. And you've seen a lot of teams like the Steelers, in theory, or by name, are a 3-4 base defense. But you look at how much they're actually in nickel or in dime, and that represents like about 80% of their snaps. And so there's going to be plenty of opportunities where you're going to have five defensive backs on the field. And it's just a matter of how do you configure those guys? What roles do you cast each one in? But I think there's going to be potential for it. The other thing I'll say about this whole situation is it's not the worst idea in the world to take a 34-year-old Darius Slay off the field for 5 or 10 snaps a game, and just give him a little bit of a breather. Everyone's so concerned about making all these guys fit at the same time, but I think that preserving the legs of a 34-year-old, and making sure that he's productive and effective deep into the seasons. That's another way to manage what is a little bit of a sticky situation because of the backlog at cornerback position.
Do you think Omar Khan's done making moves this offseason, whether if that's adding a safety or adding a wide receiver too?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. If the Steelers are indeed all in, which is the new narrative, well, I don't think that you can go into it with Juan Thornhill as your starting safety, or Jalen Ramsey playing a brand new position. So, some guys that I would keep my eyes on, Justin Simmons is still available. He was at one time a Pro Bowl safety with a ton of experience playing free safety. Julian Blackman didn't have the best year with the Colts last year, because he was going through an injury to his shoulder, but he can play both free or strong safety, which gives the Steelers a little bit of versatility there. Jordan Poyer's still out there. So, Whitehead's also available, and the Steelers love their 4-1-2 guys. So there are a fair number of safeties still available. And in terms of a wide receiver, I think that's a little bit of a double-edged sword or a tricky conversation, because in one regard, you would love to see what the Steelers have in Calvin Austin. And Roman Wilson is a great unknown. And I think a huge X factor that if he steps up and performs well, you feel pretty good about that room. If he has another slow start or gets injured or underwhelms, then you're like, man, this receiving core for the second straight year looks a little bit thin. So what they could do at that position, and what I think might happen, you could kind of let it play out during training camp, see what you're getting from Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin, and then decide. And maybe closer to cut down day, there's a veteran who's available because he's going to be cut, or maybe he is in fact released. That would make some sense. So we'll have to see exactly how they do it. But, just based on Omar Khan and the way that he's gone about this offseason, I have to figure that he's going to find a way to add a couple more players in some form or fashion.
Hey, we saw the Patriots do that 2 tight end look for so many years. I really think between Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth, you could have something really cooking there. He's Mike DeFabo from The Athletic. Mike, man, we really appreciate you hopping on. I'm excited for Steelers camp. We are just, we're less than a week away. We're going to be in Latrobe next week with the team. It's an exciting time of year.
Yeah, I can't wait, guys. And especially for those Dino's wings. You made me hungry just talking about it.